Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Encounter with a Creepy Man in a Poncho by a Ginger 6060. I've been debating about whether or not to share this, but I finally decided that it's been long enough for me to talk about it. This happened to me and my mom a few months ago, back in October. It happened in a very rural part of New Hampshire, like a side road on a side road type of neighborhood. It was pouring out, as it had been raining for pretty much the whole day. My mom had just gotten back from down the street in my sister's car, and I was on the couch in the living room, when suddenly I heard the doorbell ring. Our front door has a big glass pane in the front, so we can look out from the inside, and someone can look in from the outside. Through this window pane, I saw a man. I didn't get a great look at him, as I didn't have my long-distance glasses on. But the man noticed that I had seen him, and waved as if trying to be friendly. For the rest of this, I'll refer to him as Poncho Man. I got up and thought about opening the door for Poncho Man, but relented. As I couldn't properly see who it was, I didn't want to let a stranger into the house. So instead, I went down the hall to my parents' bedroom, where my mom was getting ready for work. She asked what was up, and I explained to her that a man in a poncho was outside our door and wanted to talk to us. She went as white as a ghost, and immediately stopped getting ready, closed and locked the bedroom door, and started checking the windows to make sure they were locked. I asked her what was going on. My mom explained that as she was driving home, she had seen the Poncho Man. He had been standing motionless on the side of the main street, and as soon as my mom turned down our road, he started to walk, presumably to follow her. She said the encounter was weird, but thought nothing more of it. Why would someone be out in the pouring rain, down a back road in the afternoon? It was like he was waiting for something. I started to panic as well. My mom called my aunt, and the two are like best friends, and she asked her what we should do. My aunt told her to call the police immediately, so we did. We proceeded to pace around the bedroom, frantically looking out the windows to see if we could see Poncho Man. From where the bedroom was angled, it was impossible to look at the front porch and see if he was still there, but we were desperate for anything. After what felt like hours, we finally saw a police car pull up. We carefully unlocked the door and went to let the officer in, and we explained what we saw. Then he agreed to do a scan around the neighborhood. As he left, I noticed there was something on the doorknob. I took it off, and it was a political ad for a candidate that was running for office. It's possible Poncho Man was just campaigning for the candidate, but there are a lot of holes in that story. It was pouring out, so why would you go door to door? Then why would you go that route in such a rural neighborhood? The houses are so far apart, you'd barely make a dent on foot. The time doesn't make sense either. Sure, my mom and I were home, but it was about 4 in the afternoon. Most people would still be at work, so you'd probably get no response from knocking anyway. Eventually, the officer returned. He had found the guy down the road and had questioned him. Poncho Man was able to ID himself, and he claimed that he was a political campaigner and was just knocking on doors for that reason. When probed further, conveniently enough, Poncho Man couldn't provide any other door signs, as the one he had left on our house was the last one. That makes his campaign story even more absurd. Our house is in the middle of the street. It's not like we were the last by any means, so why wouldn't you bring enough for the whole street? Even the officer pointed this out to us and said that it was unusual behavior. Although the officer was suspicious of him, there wasn't anything he could do about it, as there was no way to prove intent. He told us to be alert and to not hesitate to call if the Poncho Man returned. Fast forward a few weeks, and I started noticing that a police car seemed to be permanently stationed down the road from us, about a 3-minute drive. I got curious and asked my mom about it, and she said that there were multiple break-ins to the houses down the road, and the police were doing sort of a sting operation. The Poncho Man encounter and the break-ins may be unrelated, but considering how Poncho Man acted, I have a sinking feeling that they are connected. Thankfully, for the past few months, we've heard and seen nothing of Poncho Man. We got a new doorbell system with a camera, and the police left the area where they were doing the sting. I hope this whole situation is over and done with, and that I never have to meet Poncho Man. Guy from the Store, submitted by Lynn R. This happened 2 years ago before my mom and I moved. I was in college staying home to save money while I went to school and worked my part-time job, and my mom was recently divorced, so she enjoyed having me around. We did have 4 cats, but I joked that I didn't want her turning into crazy cat lady if she lived on her own. This really after the tumultuous relationship she had just ended with my dad. My dad has nothing to do with this story, and I love my dad very much, but he and my mom were just not a good mix. They did end things on a good note, and 2 years later are better friends than they were when they were married. But the events leading up to their breakup was not the best. Okay, I'll shut up about that. We lived in a decent neighborhood in a residential area of my city. My street was one of the only ones that had off-street parking for each individual home, as city life made everyone park in the street or wherever they could. It was kind of a nicer neighborhood from a time long gone by, while everything else eventually got built up around it. After my classes this day, which I was taking via Zoom due to the pandemic craziness, I would often go down to a supermarket about 2 blocks away to shop for dinner, which I always made for my mom. She busted her ass at work, and I always liked to prepare something for both of us to kind of end the day on a relaxing note. Plus, I love cooking. When this all started, that's exactly what I was doing. I was shopping at the store for the things I needed that night. Just a couple of things I had forgotten on my normal weekly shopping trip. As I was walking through the aisles, I noticed a man in his late 30s looking at me. At first I couldn't be sure because really, how can you be sure in situations like that someone really is looking at you, and not just something else in the store? But I confirmed it when he came over to where I was, and I was looking at some produce, and he said, "Excuse me, I don't want you to think I'm weird, but I wanted to tell you that you have really great legs. Have we met somewhere before?" Okay, that's not awkward. I know I'm in really good shape, and I take care of my body, and that wouldn't be weird if the situation hadn't been with a total stranger. But I gave off a meek thank you, and then I just got what I needed and moved away. As I walked around the rest of the store, I only saw him 1 or 2 more times, as I was busy shopping. I just chalked it up to a guy who didn't know how to talk to women and was giving it his best shot. I got all of my items checked out and made my short walk home, kind of laughing about things and thinking about what I was going to tell my mom when I saw her. When I did get home, I put everything away and cracked out some of my assignments before I was going to get dinner going. I went to get the mail, and when I went out of my front door, for some reason I looked down the street and saw what looked like the same guy I saw in the grocery store. Now he was just standing on the sidewalk about 2 houses down from mine. It really was just a quick glance, but I noticed the red ball cap that he had been wearing and made the connection that it was the same guy. Not trying to be paranoid, I just went back inside and tried not to think of anything of it. I mean, who knows? Maybe he was a neighbor I had never seen before, or perhaps someone visiting someone in my neighborhood. We have a very tight-knit neighborhood, and all of us, for the most part, are on a first-name basis, but the truth is I couldn't say I really knew every single person that lived there. So I went back inside and started making dinner, and it was now around 4:30 in the afternoon, about 45 minutes before my mom would be home from work. The front doorbell rang, and I went to answer it, and of course just looked outside to see who it was before opening the door. There was no one there, so immediately I thought, UPS? FedEx? I opened the door to see if a package had been left, and again glanced up the street when I noticed there was no package on our front porch. What I did see was a figure running away that was wearing a red ball cap. Now I had a new set of questions bouncing around in my head. Was it the same guy? Was it a neighborhood kid that kind of resembled him that was just playing a prank on me? I mean, who hasn't done the whole ding-dong ditch thing in their life, right? I shut the door, got back to dinner, and waited for my mom to come home. When she did, I gave her a few minutes to chill out before dinner and mentioned the things that had happened that afternoon later. She kind of shrugged when I told her and said there were so many coincidences. How could we draw that it's the same guy you saw in the store doing those things and saying those things? We got on with the evening, and I had more reading to do for school, so after feeding the cats and playing with a couple of them before bed, I should mention 2 of them are extremely lovable. One is 50-50, and the other is a complete epitome of a nasty house cat. Loves you when he wants to, makes sure you know you are serving him, and is markedly not as affectionate as the other cats. But we all got along. But for some reason, Tom was hanging out near me. After trying to pet him for a few seconds, Tom jumped away and went up into the bay window, looking out over our front porch. He is certainly a protector as much as he is a jerk, and I heard his low growl as he looked out the window. He has a growl that sounds kind of like he's purring, but there's a menacing aspect to it. You can tell that he's mad. I was switching off the lights in our living room, and when the room was dark, I walked over to where Tom was sitting. I asked him what he was looking at, and he kind of glanced over his shoulder at me and then went back to looking out the front window. I crouched next to him and pulled the curtain a little bit over to the side to see what he might be looking at, and knowing Tom, it was just someone taking their dog for a walk or something like that. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, and the street light right next to my yard and my neighbor's yard was shining brightly, and there was nothing going on. But it was at the edge of the light that I thought I saw someone standing looking at our house. My heart sank that it was the same person with the red ball cap, and that made me go up to my room that also looked out through the trees onto the street. It was wintertime, so there were no leaves on the trees, and when I got there, I looked over to the streetlight where we had just been looking. Sure enough, across the street, just in the shadows, was someone standing, wearing a red ball cap. The man just stood there for another few minutes before turning and walking across the street directly under the light, and that's when I knew it was the same guy. I called to my mom and I said, "Hey, I think that guy is outside again." And she came from her room into mine and looked out just as the figure was walking back up the street, out of range of our sight. Mom said to just make sure all the doors were locked, asked me what my schedule was the next day, and said that she would also be making sure to take better stock of the surroundings because at this point, things were getting weird. Nothing happened that night outside of the normal 2:30 a.m. cat freak-out any cat owner experiences. I mean, we love them, but they drive us crazy, right? The next morning, I got up at my normal time to go to the gym, and as I was backing down our driveway from our garage, I was looking on both sides in the dark to see if someone was standing outside our house. Trying to still not be paranoid, I kept thinking I would see someone, but didn't. So I just got my workout in and was on my way home knowing that I had to shower quick to get to my first class. My mom would already be gone by that time. So I got cleaned up, got something to eat, and then logged on for my Zoom meeting. It was a pretty boring lecture, and I got up to make some tea when I looked out my kitchen window into our small backyard and saw that I had forgotten to close the garage. That's when I saw him. Now I knew it was the same guy. Long hair, green military-style jacket, and a red ball cap. He was staring into our garage. I immediately went to the extra remote control for the garage that we keep in our kitchen. I hit the button and then went to the back door. I opened it and yelled out, "Hey, who are you? What are you doing in our backyard?" The guy never even looked in my direction, but immediately bolted down our driveway to the street. That's when I called my mom to tell her about what had happened, and she said to call the police. I called the non-emergency number and let them know that there was someone strange in our neighborhood that I had never seen before, but that I thought I had seen him at the store before and that he had talked to me. Without busting on our city's police, I got the "be sure to keep an eye out if you see him again and call us back" line. Okay, sure, I said, knowing that the only way anyone was going to come out was if something serious happened. Nothing happened for the rest of the day and the next evening, but things were about to escalate. The following day I did my gym routine, and I should mention the gym is about 2 miles from my house. I was talking to a friend as we walked back to our cars. It was just starting to get light out at that point when I stopped in my tracks. I noticed the same guy was standing at the edge of the parking lot of the gym. I told my friend that someone was following me, and we both went back inside right away. I told some of the guys at the gym and also called the police from there. I told them that someone I thought who had been hanging around my house was now hanging around the gym that I was at, and they told me to stay put. This time they did send someone out. The officer asked me for a full description of the person, what he'd been doing, and then asked me to retell the same thing I had told the police the other day. He asked me if he could follow me home, and I said yes, that would be great. He gave me his card and told me to call him if something else happened. He said he was going to make a full report and see if a patrol car could go up and down our neighborhood a couple of times during the day, just to see if anyone was hanging around, or maybe even possibly scare off someone who may have been hiding out. I was nervous about going home and being alone, so I decided I was going to get all my stuff for school and go to the public library rather than be home. I emailed my professors and said I was going to be working on assignments but wasn't going to be in class that day. I don't know why I thought that would be a good idea, but it made me feel better to be around other people. I stayed at the library for most of the day, outside of going to get something to eat around 1, and then I headed home. My cell phone rang, and it was my mom. She was already home for some reason, and was yelling into the phone that she saw the guy standing on our porch when she pulled in. Same jacket, same hair, same ball cap. I told her to call the police immediately and that I was on my way home too. At first she said to stay away, but I was not about to leave my mom home alone with some weirdo stalking around our house. I got home, and shortly after an officer pulled up in front of our house, as did another car. We again told them everything that had been happening, and they said that they were going to put a full description out on their radios for everyone to be on the lookout for anyone matching the description we gave them. I asked them about driving around our neighborhood, as the first officer I talked to said what they would do, and the officer confirmed that they had been doing it, but they hadn't seen anything or anyone out of the ordinary. We were both pretty scared at this point, my mom and I, that is. This was someone who was not going away, and even though I joked about it, was kind of freaked out, as well as whoever this guy was didn't seem to change his clothes. When I pointed that out to the police officer, the other officer said, "Hey, he might be a homeless person who's just confused." I almost laughed out loud at that, as it certainly was the same person I saw in the store, and if he was a homeless person that was confused, he sure had a funny way of showing that after our conversation and his weird compliment. The police left, and I made something to eat for dinner, but my mom and I were both on edge. Thankfully, it was Friday, and my boyfriend was coming over to visit. He lived in a town about an hour away and was planning on staying the weekend. We all just decided to have a couple of drinks and relax, and we were planning on going out to meet some of my friends, but suddenly I didn't feel like that and kind of wanted to just be with him at home. Chris is an awesome guy, and we're now engaged to be married, by the way. He tried to keep the evening light for us, knowing we were a little shaken up. And as the evening wore on and we had a couple of bottles of wine and my mom decided to retire for the evening, we were just kind of doing our thing, making out in the living room and talking about all the things school and future that were in our paths. Around 12:30, Chris looked up and said, "Someone's outside." I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said that he could hear someone was on the porch, but wasn't sure if they were still there. The lights were off in the living room, and he went over to the bay window. He ripped the curtains open, and there, staring into the windows from the other side, was the guy. This was the first time we both got a look at him, and he didn't look anything like he looked in the store to me. Now he looked disheveled and really creepy. His eyes seemed to be bugging out of his head. Chris jumped back and then ran for the front door with me telling him to not open it. He wasn't listening to me as he ran out onto the front porch and tackled the guy. I mean, really tackled him. They both went over the porch railing into the bushes and onto the frozen ground. They were rolling all over the place. I was screaming, and my mom came down. The cats were inside going bananas, and that's when Chris let out a very loud yell. I was standing on the porch yelling if he was okay as he was clutching onto this guy. And thankfully, my mom had called 911. Chris was yelling all kinds of swear words at this guy, and I could see darkness on the snow around our bushes, but not realizing at the time that it was actually blood. I kept screaming, and now lights were coming on in our neighbors' houses, and my next-door neighbor came out with a flashlight and immediately jumped towards Chris and the guy. It seemed like forever, but the cops finally showed up and grabbed both Chris and the guy, and they got them separated. I was trying to hold it together, but kept yelling for Chris, and my neighbor was trying to do his best to hold the other guy to help the police officer. Another police car showed up, and things started to get a little settled down. But the guy was screaming about someone named Scarlett, and that he had to see her. Chris finally piped up and said, I've been stabbed, and the cops attended to him quickly. It was kind of hard to see things in the dark, even though the streetlight was there. Chris had in fact been stabbed twice, once in his thigh and once in his arm. Now another cop car pulled up, and all of these people in the neighborhood were now surrounding our yard, and an ambulance was called for Chris. My mother was on the porch in hysterics, and I was crying my eyes out, trying to make sure Chris was going to be okay. He kept saying he was going to be fine, but the cop said, "You need to get to the hospital right now." They got the man in the red ball cap into a car and tried to start settling the neighborhood down. Another car showed up, and there were tons of questions for me and my mom, and of course Chris. One of the police officers found the knife that the man had stabbed Chris with, and it was a big survival-type knife. Actually, the officer called it a Rambo knife. I was asked to go with Chris to the hospital, and another officer would be following us there. Once we got there, Chris needed a bunch of stitches in his arm for a really big gash, but the stab wound in his right thigh needed staples. The knife was so sharp, it really split his leg open like a ripe melon. Chris was in stable condition, but had lost a lot of blood on our front yard as well as on the way to the hospital. He was going to be fine, so I breathed a sigh of relief about that. The officer who stayed with us asked way more questions for us and told us that the man was indeed homeless and mentally incapacitated. He was convinced I was his ex-wife when he saw me at the store. And then he was telling the police that he needed to talk to me about his divorce. He wasn't strung out on drugs, he just wasn't in his head anymore. A while later, I learned a little bit more about him, and it's a very sad story. His wife had cheated on him with his business partner, and the two of them had stolen all of the money out of the business and run off together. They had taken this guy for everything that he had in his life, and he kind of just went crazy and then went into the streets. This had happened about 8 years before all of this happened to me. We did have to press charges, and he was put into a criminal facility in a hospital. For all I know, he's still there, but he pled guilty to all the charges. I think someone convinced him that this was the best thing for him to do, and I like to think that maybe one part of his sane mind realized who he really was, where he was, and what he'd been up to. Chris healed just fine. My mom decided to move to Florida and sold the house, and I got my own place as I finished up school. Chris and I are planning on moving as well as soon as I finish my degree. So that's my story of basically being stalked by a guy who thought I was someone else. It's too bad he couldn't have talked to me, or maybe I could have talked to him to let him know that I wasn't who he thought I was. Maybe all of this could have been avoided. I'm very thankful to the police officers who showed up and took what I was saying seriously after the first call where I didn't think they cared at all. I am much more diligent about being with people when I go out now. Even though I know I'm safe, every once in a while I will see someone at a store or a bar or a restaurant who's looking at me, and I think, oh boy, is this going to be round 2? It's hard to get out of that mindset. Thanks for sharing my story if you do, and all I can say to everyone is be aware of your surroundings, and don't take things lightly if you have a gut feeling that something is wrong. I don't harbor ill feelings towards the guy who did this stuff, and I just hope that he's getting the help that he needs, and I hope that he can get back into life. I'm not sure if that's possible, but there's always hope. A Block Away from Home by Nia. So this happened on Saturday. I'm a 29-year-old female, and I live in a decent neighborhood. Not the best, but definitely not one usually thought of as super dangerous. It wasn't even that late, like 9:30 in the evening, and it is summer in my country, so it had been dark for an hour or two at most. I had left my friend taking transport back home, and since my friend had left in a rush, there was a thing I wanted to tell her that I felt I would forget once I was home. But I got my phone taken from my hands a few months ago, so I was waiting until I was in a safe place to take it out. I turned a corner, and there's literally 1 block to my house, and this is a pretty small street. I thought I was safe, and suddenly, someone talked to me. His words were slurred, so I didn't quite get what he said, and it was dark. But after a moment, I understood he was telling me to give him my phone, or my wallet, or something. I stared, and despite the darkness, I saw something in his hand, which he was holding very much like a gun. I think it might have been fake, but still, I was terrified. For some reason, I looked around, and not so far away, walking towards me, was another woman. I screamed for help and ran away from the man, all the while bracing myself for the pain in case the gun wasn't fake. The woman yelled at me to stop running and to go get inside one of the buildings closest to us, and we did. There, after having a panic attack, the woman told me the man had been next to a car that I didn't see because I was so fixated on the possible gun. I doubt the man wanted anything other than my phone, but still, the fact he had a quick and easy escape and that there was a possibility that I could have lost more than just my cell phone was terrifying. So to the man, let's never meet again. And to the woman and her friend who walked me that block home, and also the doorwoman that gave me water when I was panicking, I'm sorry I didn't ask your names or properly thank you, but you guys are my heroes. Bad Neighbor, submitted by Blonde Brian. This happened when I was 15 years old and my sister was 13. We grew up in a suburb of Rochester, New York, in a good neighborhood with a good school district and lots of friends everywhere we could walk or ride our bikes to. It was an awesome place to live and still is, even though I'm much older now and live in San Diego. My sister and me both wanted to get summer jobs for spending money outside of our allowance. So Jane and I would ask our neighbors if they had any jobs or chores they would like us to do on a weekly basis for the summer months. Mowing the lawn, watering flowers, whatever. I got a couple of lawn jobs that my sister would help me with, but we thought we hit the jackpot when one of our neighbors, I'll call Stan, asked if we were interested in light cleaning in his house. My mom said no at first, until Stan explained to her that we wouldn't be using household chemicals, just dusting and vacuuming, that sort of thing. I think the most caustic job we had was washing windows once in a while, and my mom was cool with that. I love my mom, but she was very protective. I mean, seriously, we could use all that shit at our house, but have someone else ask us to do it for money? That's crazy talk. Stan was going to pay us $20 a week, so we were going to split that, and I told her that I would give her some of my money for lawn mowing jobs. We were going to be making an extra bunch of bank for the summer. We both got a $10 allowance on top of that, so all this extra money was really great for us. The first time we went to Stan's house, he showed us all the stuff that he wanted us to do every Friday. And he showed us where he kept the vacuum, the dusting stuff, all that kind of thing. We figured it would only take us about an hour and a half to do everything, so it was a deal and a half in our world. Everything was fine, and we started working as soon as school ended in June. The only time we couldn't do anything was one week when my parents always took us on summer vacation, and Stan was fine with that. Stan had been in the neighborhood for as long as I can remember, was married but didn't have kids, just 2 corgi dogs that were a lot of fun to play with. We were doing our thing every week until the last week of July when we were going on vacation. We had a bunch of money stocked up for the trip. We were going to see my cousins in Pennsylvania, and we had a blast. Everything was just a great time. When we got home, our accumulated mail had been dropped off by the mailman, and my dad was going through all the stuff we had received. Most of it junk, I'm sure, just like today. But he came across a handwritten note and then looked at my mom and didn't say anything. When she asked him about it, he said he would talk to her in a few minutes, and then asked me and my sister to keep unloading the Navigator. We didn't think anything about it. We were just ready to go see our friends and head over to my friend Randy's pool for a swim. This was on a Sunday, and when we got back, we completely forgot about the look my dad gave my mom when he read the note. That Monday, I was getting ready to go out that morning to do one of the lawns I had to normally do on a weekend, but my dad asked me to stay home for a little bit. I called the neighbor whose lawn I cut, and he just joked with me that if I took any longer, the grass was going to grow over his house. I told him I would be there later that day. At about 10 that morning, a guy came to our house who turned out to be a detective with the police department. He introduced himself, and my father invited him in and told me and my sister to go in the backyard for a minute, but not to go anywhere else. I immediately thought of the note, but being dutiful to my parents, I just did as my father asked and dragged my sister with me. It was then that I realized my mom had stayed home from work, too, so something certainly was up. My dad called for us to come back inside after a bit and told us that the detective had some questions for us and we needed to be truthful with our answers. The detective asked us about what we did at Stan's house, and we told him about our cleaning job that we'd been doing for the past couple of weeks. He nodded and wrote things down and asked about what rooms we went into, what kind of chores we did, all that stuff. Seemed pretty straightforward. And then I asked, "Are we in trouble?" The detective looked at my dad and then looked at us and said, "No, you're not in any kind of trouble." But then he started asking questions about if we noticed anything strange in Stan's house. We both said no. We just did our cleaning thing and sometimes stayed longer to play with the dogs. I should mention that Stan and his wife were not home while we cleaned the house. They had jobs too. The detective thanked us for our time, and then my dad and he went out into our front yard and kept talking. After he drove away and my dad had come back inside, I asked my dad what was up, and he said he would tell me about it in a little while. Then he made a phone call and took a walk up the street to a neighbor's house. I had asked him if I could go and cut my lawn, and he said yeah. We had no idea what was happening, but by the time I was finished cutting my lawn, Randy had called me and asked if I wanted to go swimming. So I got permission from my mom, and that's what I did. When I got home for lunch, my dad and mom were at our kitchen table talking, and they didn't look very happy. The detective had come back to talk to my dad, and he just seemed very angry. I asked him if everything was okay and if we were in trouble. He just took me by the arm and gave me a big hug. My sister came into the room and he did the same thing to her. My dad was a very gruff guy and did not show his emotions very much when I was growing up. As he's gotten older, he's much more emotional, especially when it comes to his grandkids. I guess he was saving all of that up for them. And that's okay, because I loved my dad and mom no matter what. My dad asked me to get him a beer out of the fridge, and I did, also asking for the customary sip. He smiled and said, "Go ahead." Everything seemed to be calmed down. But later that day, the detective came back one more time and spoke with my father privately. It wasn't until the next day that my dad sat me and Jane down and said the detective was coming back over. And when he got there, he opened up a manila envelope and showed some pictures to us. They were pictures of me and Jane at Stan's house as we were cleaning. We both looked at each other and answered the detective when he asked us, "Is that you?" And we said, "Yeah, that's us." He didn't say anything else and just nodded. And then he had some more pictures of me without my t-shirt on as I worked. Stan's house didn't have air conditioning, and it did get hot in there, so sometimes I would take my t-shirt off. And my little sister would work in her sports bra. We didn't think anything of it. We were home alone. It's my sister, for crying out loud, and no one else was around, so we didn't think it was weird. What we didn't know is that Stan had asked another neighborhood kid to fill in for us on the Friday that we had been on vacation. That's when the trouble started. It was a kid I knew in the neighborhood named Ben, but wasn't friends with him because he was only 11 or so. Ben had been asked to do what we did, but Stan was home when Ben was there. Stan had apparently asked Ben to work wearing a pair of shorts that Stan asked him to wear, saying that they were special cleaning shorts. They were just like regular bike shorts, but Stan also asked him to take off his t-shirt. Ben did what he was told, but immediately told his mom when he got home after getting his money. Ben's mom then called the police, as she was a single mom and didn't want to confront Stan or Stan's wife on her own when she knew something was very wrong. Stan had also taken pictures of Ben, which the police went over and asked him about. Stan admitted to taking the pictures and was reluctant to show the police the pictures he had taken. But when he did, he wasn't careful with the printouts that he had, and the police noticed other pictures in this scrapbook that he had. This led to more questions for Stan, and eventually, in the next 2 days before we got home, the police raided his house. They found all kinds of child pornography on his computer, including the pictures of me and my sister. Obviously, we weren't in any kind of pornographic picture, but we were still lumped in with all these other kids. Stan had been home the entire time we were doing our job for him, but he had been hiding and taking pictures of us as we worked. Like I said, the other pictures were terrible, according to my parents, and we were never really shown what they were. I can only imagine. Stan was arrested for trafficking kiddie porn and was convicted and is now serving a sentence in prison. He got 16 years for the amount of stuff that he had, and he was also sharing and trading it on the internet in various chat rooms and websites. Whenever he does get out, he's also a registered sex offender, wherever he goes. All I do know is that his wife left him, but I think he is up for release this year. It's creepy as hell for me and my sister to this day to think that our pictures had been stored with some of the most vile garbage that can possibly be created out there. What kills me is that he had actual photographs that he had to have had developed or printed out on his own computer. I mean, those were of us. Why he did that, I have no idea. But in one instance, I feel glad that he did, because it was his downfall, and he got caught for all the other crap that he had. Goes to show you that you never really know who your neighbors are. Stan and his wife always seemed like regular people and joined in neighborhood get-togethers all the time. And who knows what else he was up to. But I'm glad he was arrested and sent to jail. Sick people like that don't ever change, and it sounds like he had a collection that went back many, many years. I don't think about this all the time, but I thought I would send my story into you, and as I finish writing this out, I'm going to check on my kids who are now fast asleep. I'm a trusting person, but when it comes to my kids, I have vowed never to be lax. The thought of them ever ending up in pictures like that on someone's computer or wherever else is terrifying to me. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you would like to be narrated on my podcast or YouTube channel, send it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. We're closing in on Valentine's Day, and I love doing relationship stories. So if you've got a crazy story about a crazy ex, a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, whatever it may be, send it my way. I would love to share it with the Campfire crew. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Follow me on social media. Links to that are in the description below. And if you want to support the page a step further, find me on Patreon. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door. He left the house to go back into the house. What? The fuck does... I thought he was wearing a red ball cap, but I noticed that he was wearing a red ball cap. Well, Jesus. If you fucking noticed it, he was wearing it. And that's when I decided... Shit. Bleh. If you have a story that you'd like to hear narrated on this channel or my podcast, send it to Uncle Josh Scary Story... I can't even remember my own fucking email. Fuck. Oh my God. Please. At this point, we were really freaked out. Yeah, no shit. Oh, God. Wait. None of that... Oh. You gotta be fucking kidding me. Who talks like that? No one talks like that. All right, that's it. That's enough for today. Oh, my God. My fucking brain hurts after that one.